Right. I have various questions that you have asked over your slips that I can get to if there aren't enough questions or, whatnot. I didn't get whatever you wrote on the slips last week because I don't think Donald got them into us in time. So if you wrote questions about agents or prose or dialogue, I guess, go ahead and ask them now. But you have about an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 5 minutes to just hit me with any random question that you feel like asking. Go for it.
This is two-parter. Part one, do you ever face discouragement or writer's block when you're on a long project? And part two, how do you get through it?
Okay, so discouragement and writer's block. Two-part question. Both very important things that sometimes I cover during the class, so I'm glad you brought this up. The part in my life where I was the most discouraged as a writer was when I had finished 12 novels and had not sold any of them. This was kind of discouraging. When I've been sending them out, the rejection letters are piling up. My mom is calling my dad to call me to be like, what are you doing with your life? Right? He's like, so, son, this writing thing, all of that sort of stuff. And I got into a little bit of a funk where I'm like, what am I doing, right? I've written all these novels. Nobody's buying them. I'm going to be, like my mom always said, begging for beans on the side of the road. And I thought a lot about it. And I had some thoughts. The main one was, I love writing these books, right? This is what I do. This is what I think I'm built to do. This is what, I feel I should be doing. This is where I am, and I'm very proud of these books. And I had to confront a question that you might have to confront, which is, if I hit age 90 and I die, and my family finds 100 unpublished manuscripts in my closet, am I a bigger success than if I give up now? Meaning, am I willing to take the risk as a writer that this will never be anything more than a hobby? Am I willing to accept that that could happen? And for me, the answer was yes. The writing of the books and giving them to my friends, as Jane Austen did for her career, and never getting any renown or whatnot, was enough for me. And it's led me over the years to some sort of, philosophical look at this whole writing thing, which, as I said, we take the assumption in this class, during the class period, that you want to be a pro, right? But you don't have to do that. In fact, I don't know if I shared this kind of analogy with you at the beginning of class, but how many of you have friends or you like to go play basketball or volleyball or something like this? You go play basketball with your friends every Wednesday night. That's a pretty solid hobby, right? You're doing it every week. It's something that's taking a substantial amount of your time. But people don't come to you and be like, oh, so when are you going to join the NBA, right? They can accept that you might go play basketball even twice a week or go golfing twice a week, that it's your hobby, that you love it. They will accept that that's good for you and that that's a legitimate use of your time. But if someone is writing a book, for some reason our society is like, so when is this thing that is worthless going to make money, right? When is that novel going to get published and when are you going to go pro? We have this kind of the arts, we feel like they have to prove their validity by being worth money before it's worth someone's time, which I think is a complete and utter falsehood. If you love writing the books, if you enjoy doing this, and for you, I have a good friend in my writing group. He's a math teacher. That's his true passion in life, but his hobby is writing books, and every summer when he's off for math, he writes one. Not a whole book, but he writes something. He loves it. He's never going to be a professional writer. He knows that. He doesn't care. He loves writing the stories. And you can be anywhere in between that, and I seriously intend this to be my career someday, and you just have to be willing to accept that it may never become that, right? Now, part of the point of this class is kind of to prove to you that it happens more often than people think it does. I have a student or two every year who get published with a major publisher, right? I have a student or two every year who go self-published and consistently put things out like Joe. So in this class, we've already had one person get a book deal, okay? So it's not like it's not going to, it's impossible. It's not like, people pretend 1 out of a million make it. No, out of a class like this of people who are serious, my class with Dave, there are 4 of us who are pro out of 20 people. So those are pretty good odds compared to what people say, they might be someday. They pretend that it's 1 in a million. But still, if you're looking at a career, 25% odds, even if they're that good, which they might not be. But if 25% odds of you spend 10 years of this and you might be able, 1 in 4 chance to be pro, career-wise, that's a pretty big gamble. So you have to be willing to take that gamble, decide where you are on the scale of I love doing this. You should do it because you love it. And if the pro happens, then great. And if you really want to go pro, there are lots of things you can do, we've talked about in this class, to really improve your odds. So does that make sense? That's part 1 of your question is, if you're getting discouraged about your writing, you have to ask yourself why you're doing it. Okay? Now, writer's block is something separate, because writer's block can be a symptom. It's kind of like having a headache. If you go to the doctor and say, I have a headache, they're like, great, that narrows our list of, 1,000 different ailments to 990 possible causes, right? What are you even doing? They'll go through all these other questions. Same thing with writer's block. So many things can cause writer's block. And different writers will have completely different methods of getting over writer's block. And this is where you have to learn your psychology and try different strategies and see what gets you past writer's block. For me, if I have writer's block, there are 2 main causes. And I've only been able to figure these out over years of practice, which is which. Number 1 is the one that you probably assume it is every time you get writer's block, which is something is fundamentally broken with the story, and I can't continue because I can't write this character as who they are without fixing their entire character arc, because each step I'm taking is taking me further away. Something is so broken that each step it's taking me away from my goals. So I have to stop and rebuild the story, and that's really hard and frustrating. That's 1 out of, 100 writer's blocks, but it does happen. You assume that it's every one of them. It's not. For me, most writer's blocks are, I'm having trouble with this scene, I'm not feeling like writing today, I got a bad review, I said something stupid to my roommate and or significant other, and they're mad at me, and so it's hard to keep focused. It's one of those many things, and so you just feel cruddy about your writing that day. That's most of them. For me, the best way to get beyond that is to write the scene anyway. Write it poorly. This part of writer's block is the fear that you're writing something bad, the secret fear that you're a hack. Is part of what's the motivation for this writer's block. And really, it happens a lot in the early career of writers that their ability to see good writing has outstripped their ability to write it. So they get discouraged about what they're creating because you see on the page something, you're like, this is not what I imagined. When I took jazz band for the first time, I was a pretty good trumpeter at that point. I had taken lessons for like 8 years. Took jazz band, could not improv. I could hear an improv song, and the notes would not come out the front of the horn, and I was so frustrated. And my teacher's like, yes, you need to go really reinforce your scales. It's a new way of thinking. It will take you years to figure this out. You're like, I know stories. I've read lots of great stories. I know how to write. I've been trained in writing since I was in kindergarten. I know how to write, but storytelling through prose is a completely different way of writing that you're going to have to rebuild your thinking about and practice a lot, and you can recognize it's bad. So these sorts of things, you just need to write it poorly first. Even, if you're a professional writer and you're having a bad day, you just need to write it anyway. And I will tell you 9 out of 10 times that I do that, the chapter doesn't suck. I go back the next day, I'm like, I was just in a funk. But my skill that I prepared myself with for years of practice still came through, and I can do a quick revision, and the chapter looks just like the one that I wrote the day before when I was totally on fire. 1 out of 10 times, it didn't, but the mere fact of writing it poorly, now that there's something there to fix, my brain's like, oh, I know what you did wrong. Oh, let's take this a completely different direction, that chapter, and we'll fix the chapter. So I often say that if you have a serious bout of writer's block, try just having ninjas attack, right? Just do something. Write that scene in some way. Have ninjas attack, or write it from a different viewpoint, put it in a different location, do something to shake it up and make yourself excited about it, have something go wrong in the chapter you weren't planning. Don't assume it's going to end up in the book. Just write it and let your subconscious work on it. That tends to work for a lot of people. Students that have had writer's block that come in, and I've told them to do these separate things, it almost always gets them out of it. Another one you can try is try a monologue by your characters explaining their motives, what they feel about the outline that you've given to them. Do some of those free writes with your character viewpoints. Try moving to writing longhand. It's another one that helps a lot of people. If you have writer's block, just for that chapter, write it in longhand. Helps you turn off your internal editor. Just write it out to yourself. It doesn't have to be good till I actually type it in the computer. Stuff like that. Okay? All right, other questions? Hopefully ones I will answer faster than that.
You mentioned that we might talk about publishers and show and tell.
Okay. So I can talk a little bit about publishers. And I'll try to do kind of a quicker version of this. But I think we'll leave show versus tell for go research show versus tell online. I've talked about it. It is just one of these fundamental things to do in writing with prose. Learn how to show versus tell, and it's so much easier if you can find an exercise online where they'll say, try to trim this down by 10%. Try it with your writing. Try to make it more active. Try to get rid of passive verbs highlight all the wases and to be's and things like that. He was a man like this. It highlights it. You say, well, how can I show that he was a man like this? Try some of those exercises. It's one of those hands-on things that you really have to do a lot of. Publishers. So here's the thing. How many of you guys are writing teen or middle grade? So you guys, I can help a lot less. The reason for this is that I broke in through epic fantasy, not through teen. I have published in teen, and I started publishing in middle grade 2 years after I broke in, but I already had an agent, and my agent handled it. And so I have much less in the trenches advice on teen. When I've asked about it, a lot of people say that teen does tend to be more corporate, meaning that it's a lot less easy to break in without an agent into teen and middle grade. And this kind of follows one of the fundamental rules of bad writing in that it's really hard to write a good teen book, just as hard as it is to write a good adult book, but because they're much shorter, it's a lot easier to write a bad one. So, for instance, picture books, which are the easiest to write bad versions of, still very hard to write a good one, but it takes, you could probably write a bad one in an afternoon. They get so many submissions, right? And middle grades and chapter books the same way. It's so much easier to write a chapter book. You take a few weekends, you write out, the 5,000 words that could go in one of these short chapter books, and then they send them in. And you're like, yes, but it doesn't take as long to review, but you got to remember they're only reading one page of it no matter what it is. So the people who are having the teen submissions are having just way more submissions because more people are writing them poorly. What this has resulted in is that teen publishers tend to be a bit more corporate. The other big distinction here is science fiction and fantasy had a very grassroots start. A lot of writers and a lot of fans said nobody's writing the stuff that we want. We will go ahead and write it, create our fanzines. Publishers grew out of that. All the big publishers in science fiction that I can think of that have a legacy, that weren't just started brand new, were started because some fan became a publisher to publish these books and started as a small press. And so things like Da was Donald Wollheim, right? And things like Del Rey was Lester Del Rey. And Tor was Tom Doherty. These are started by fans, basically. No one got into science fiction because of the money. If you wanted the money, you went into other areas of publishing. You went into science fiction because you like science fiction. So what this means is there are a lot of publishers in science fiction who still have this kind of tradition of grassroots, this kind of tradition of, we don't need no agents, we are fans and we like publishing fans. This also means that some of the publishers in science fiction are a lot more open to new writers, but also have more of a chaotic approach to publishing. And we'll kind of move up the list. On this side, the most chaotic is Tor. Tor is the biggest and the most wonderfully chaotic of them all. When I published with Tor, when I said I really want to be with Tor, my agent said, that's good as long as you understand one thing. There is no adult supervision at Tor. That's what he said. He said, Tom Doherty is the benevolent grandfather and he lets the grandchildren do whatever they want. And that is a tongue-in-cheek summary of what Tom has created in a publisher that is capable of publishing any great science fiction regardless of editorial style. They can publish something by Gene Wolfe that is really literary. They can then go publish something by me or John Scalzi, which is very market friendly. They can do everything in between. They've got they've got queer fiction. They've got steampunk. They've got stuff that feels like a thriller, that's an action thriller. They've got everything at Tor. Anything that you would want to publish that has a science fiction fantasy bent, Tor will take. That's different than a lot of the publishers. Some of the others are like that, but many of them are not. We only publish, 100 books a year or fewer. We publish 30 or 40. We have to have a consistent editorial vision for our line, so they feel similar. That's kind of the standard way you do publishing for a lot of these imprints. So at Tor, Tor will take unagented submissions. It will take unsolicited submissions most of the time. You look on their website, they'll tell you, but they are the most open to new writers, but they are also the ones who get the most submissions, have the most editors who are very different from one another in what they want to publish. They have a wall of slush, and whether or not you get published by Tor can depend entirely on if you got your book in the hands of the editor who likes the type of story you're writing instead of the one who doesn't. So, if you want to publish with Tor, what I recommend is finding out the different names of the different editors, and it changes, so I don't even know them all myself. Find out who they are, what writers they have published recently, who they do, and particularly what new writers they have bought and published in the last few years. Learn their names, try to meet them at conventions, try to follow their blogs, just learn who they are. Not so you're stalking them. Your job is not to go find them at the conventions and just flood them with questions from my students, but it's, go to their panels at the cons. Learn who they are. If you find them in the rooms or the hallways, say, hey, what have you had come out recently by a new writer that I can read so I can kind of get a feel for what's selling? They'll love telling you about that. Don't go ask them, what are you looking for? That's usually a bad question, because what they're looking for is something awesome. And every time they'll hum and haw at that question. But if you ask them what they recently bought, what they just had come out, tell me about your authors you're really excited about, particularly ones that you discovered, they will always be excited to tell you about that. And that goes for every publisher at every house, teen included. If you can find the editor and say, what have you bought recently? What have you had come out that you discovered? I want to go read it. Tell me about it. Do your research, in other words. This is how you start networking. You get a page in your files about the different publishers, and you start learning who they are. So that's Tor. Very similar to Tor's Bane. Bane has that same mindset. Started by Jim Bane. With half of his funding came from Tom Doherty as a silent partner. Because he couldn't be involved in it because of whatever you call it, conflict of interest, because he was running a different company. He's, by the way, Tor he sold in the 90s Tor to Macmillan. You hear about the Big Five or the Big Six? That's one of the Big Six. Big Five now, publishers. So, Bane is an independent publisher. Is the largest independent publisher of science fiction and fantasy. It is not part of the Big Five conglomeration. It was started by Jim Bane, who wanted to have books that were fun. This is kind of Bane's editorial vision that I see is kind of fun. Fun, you kind of have to learn what Bane books are. They do a lot more pulpish type stuff, which means high action, high amounts of great plotting. But they do have some variety in that. By the way, Tor's everything. So Bane does a lot of military SF. It does a lot of kind of fast-paced fantasy. It can be epic or not, but kind of fast-paced. But it also has some people like Eric Flint who do a little slower-paced alternate history stuff. So Eric Flint is another big one. But again, you kind of have to learn. This is like they want to publish stuff that feels like updated classic science fiction. Okay? You're not going to go to Bane and find something like Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom by Cory Doctorow. Generally, that's not something that meets their editorial vision. Any editor at any publisher can find something they love and convince everyone else to get behind it and publish it. That can happen. But generally, Bane is going to be looking for this kind of stuff. Larry Correa is a big author of theirs. David Weber is a big author of theirs. That sort of stuff. Bane is smaller than all the other publishers I will write up on here. They have smaller advances. They go to hardback less quickly. You have to prove yourself. But they also are very approachable and, in my opinion, very well run. I like the editorial direction at Bane quite a bit. So if you happen to be writing this style of stuff or have something like it, Bane is a good place to be looking. Eric James Stone published with Bane. Excuse me. All right. So moving along, we have the stuff under the Penguin, the Random Penguin. And the Random Penguin. The Random Penguin, it has the most because there are all these little publishers that they've gobbled up over time. And so Random Penguin has Bantam, Ace, Rock. I think it's a K. It's a C, I think. I don't know. Rock. Yeah, it's a C. Bantam, Ace, Rock, Daw. I think that is everybody. Del Rey. Do they have Del Rey? Yeah, they have Del Rey. I did, yeah. Yeah, okay. So, Random Penguin. They got so much stuff going on over there. These are still mostly have separate editorial groups running them, okay? So, the thing about it is, it's a little bit harder, like if Ace rejects something, it's a little bit harder to sell it to the others. Because they are under the same umbrella and things like this. So, Ace and Rock are generally going to be your most approachable. They have the same editorial team generally, as I understand. They are kind of half Bane, half Tor. They will publish generally anything if they like it, but they have a slightly larger skew toward, how should I say, like market-friendly fiction. Things like they do a lot of Jim Butcher style. I don't know if Jim's actually with them, but that style of urban fantasy and things like that. They do a lot of military science fiction. The Jack Campbell books are with them and are doing very well. But they will take basically anything that's awesome, and they have the authority to publish it and do it in hardback. My agent loves working with Ace and Rock. He speaks very highly of his experiences there. I've never published with them, but they're one of his favorites to sell things to. Okay? Daw has a different thing. Daw has this weird relationship where it's kind of half owned by Penguin and half not. And so Daw is this publisher. They do very few books. They like to put a lot behind them, and they generally prefer epic fantasy or epic science fiction with strong female protagonists. That's what I would say is kind of their general. You can go talk to them and see. I bet they'd be willing to they'd say to you, we just want any great fantasy. But they're more a fantasy publisher. Their big authors include Tad Williams and Melanie Ron. Was with them for many years. Pat Rothfuss is a Daw author, but there are tons of them. But they treat them really well. They publish very few books. When I was trying to break in, I targeted Tor, Ace, and Daw. Those are the only three that I sent to. Those were the publishers that I was most interested in being at, writing the style of fiction that I write. Okay? Del Rey, Bantam are a lot more corporate these days. They're kind of more, this is what we publish the big stuff. George R. Martin is with them. Anne McCaffrey is with them for many years. These are like their bestseller lines. They do still buy some new stuff. For instance, the Demon books by Peter Brett. Those are Del Rey books. So they still are interested in new authors and things like that. But every time I tried to pitch to them, and my students have kind of backed this up over the years, they're like, we'd really prefer you have an agent. But you can still find them at the con sometimes and talk to them. They're just a little bit less grassroots these days than they were. All right. All right. So then we have, let's see, that's Random Penguin. Then we have Harper. Harper, they tend to do a lot of urban fantasy. Also, in fact, a ton of urban fantasy is in the Harper lines. I think they still call it Voyager. Someone can Google that for me. Harper Voyager is one of the big ones. I have met their editors. I really like them. Nice people, seem like they know their stuff. They go to the cons. When I was trying to break in, Harper was having a bunch of trouble trying to figure out what to do with their science fiction line. That was, like, 15 years ago. So that's all in the past. Every once in a while, one of these will have some issues. They had like Harper Prison. I just couldn't figure them out when I was trying to break in. These days, they look like they're doing pretty good. Again, urban fantasy seems to be their thing, but when I asked their editor, so you do a lot of urban fantasy, is that all you're looking for? She's like, no, this is the problem. I'll take anything that's great. Any of them will take anything that's great. But Harper seems like it's actively wanting to expand its line. So I'll be watching for them. Let's see. Warner is Saga, am I right? Someone want to Google that for me so we can have it on the record on the camera, right? Saga, I believe, is Warner. Or is it? Yeah. Simon Schuster. Is it S&S? It's Simon Schuster. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Simon Schuster. We'll go to Simon Schuster. This is new, as in last 3 years or so. Saga is. They are still aggressively buying things. I know they've picked up some epic fantasies. They seem like they're aggressively hunting epic fantasy. You would have to do your research because I haven't been in it long enough, or they haven't been around while I've been hunting them, and I haven't met them as much. And so what they're really looking for is harder for me to pick out. But anytime a new press is doing things, that's a good sign, right? Someone is launching a new line. That's something you can sell to. So if you can find the editors for Saga, a good place to be potentially, but I can't vouch for them. You'd really want to approach their writers. Say, how's it been publishing with Saga? What's it looking like, all right? Last one is Orbit, which is the Hachette. I think Warner is actually under the Random Penguin umbrella these days. I don't know. You can look that up. Orbit is Hachette, one of the last of the big five. Orbit is the biggest publisher of science fiction and fantasy outside the U.S. And they've had a bit of a harder time launching here over the years. So about 6 or 7 years ago, they just kind of came in force and launched a new line and bought up a bunch of authors and really made a big splash. It was a great time to be selling fantasy right then to them because they had tons of money. They're still a great publisher, but that's like they've passed their initial investment phase and now they are kind of standardizing into a more standard science fiction fantasy publisher. Hachette is very corporate. I've worked with them. They're great. They're my UK publishers. I love how organized they are and how easy it is to get a hold of people, but they also have less inclination to take someone uneducated. If you can meet them, it's a great place to be. They publish Brian McClellan and they publish Daniel Abraham, yeah. They publish, so for a while what they were looking for was edgier fantasy, slightly edgier, grimdark sort of stuff. They really wanted to kind of make a strong editorial sort of thing. Now they'll probably take anything, but that's still kind of where they are. Is they were doing the things that were just more if you mix market friendly with grimdark, that's what they were hunting for the long. At least that's what they were buying for the longest time, because they also bought Brent Weeks with his Assassin trilogy and things like that. So that's Orbit for you. But again, in the UK, they're Tor, meaning they have the two main imprints and publish everything. So they are different publishers, but over here they're probably pushing toward the same editorial direction. So they do the Expanse, right, Isaac? Yeah. So the Expanse is epic space opera, very fast paced also. So there you go. There's your quick thing on publishers.
So you referred to cons, like what
Yes.
kind of cons will we do?
Good question. Okay, so there's general types of conventions. Let's talk about the three types that you'll run into. The first is a Comic Con. Comic Cons are fun, but generally the worst place to find editors, okay? Because there's so many people at a Comic Con, and because they're focused on exhibiting to fans, in large-scale groups, the editors generally stay away, or if they're there, they're not on any paneling because the celebrities are on the paneling. So, hard to find. You can sometimes go to a booth at a Comic Con if they have one. Most of the time they don't. The publishers do not, but once in a while they will. And you can say, hey, are any of your editors here? It's worth a shot. The answer is probably no, and or if they were, we wouldn't tell you. But, so go to Comic Cons if you like them for fun, but not the best place. That leaves two types of cons, and I separate them by calling them cons and conferences. A conference is something like Writers for Young Readers. A conference has a high ticket price to get in, and it is treated like a workshop and or pitch session. If you go to Writers for Young Readers or the LDS Storymakers, which I think they're just calling Storymakers these days, they will generally bring in an agent and an editor or something like that. Part of your fee to get in is the fact that they are doing this, and then you can sign up for pitch sessions. It's all very formal, and you have your opportunities to talk to these people and things like that, and watch programs by them. That's basically your best shot in teen, is to find the conferences, right? In teen and YA, a lot of the teen editors do these things. They come to Writers for Young Readers, or they go to like the Maui Writers Workshop or things like that, and you can find them. Cons are like what I'm doing tomorrow, which is where these grassroots science fiction things all started, which are, fans get together for, it's like the Universe and Everything, Conduit in Salt Lake. These are fan-run, not-for-profit nerd extravaganzas. They are much smaller. They'll have like 500 people at them. And if the editors are there, they are generally going for the fun of it. So these are the best places often to meet the editors, but they don't usually travel. The editors don't. It's not like they're coming to Life Universe and Everything. Like my agent came one time because I'm out here, so you can find them randomly. But more often, you have to go to the bigger two, which are Worldcon or World Fantasy Convention. And editors, generally, there'll be a percentage of editors there. At Worldcon, there's often 2 or 3 people from Tor. The whole Bane crew is usually there. There'll be some people from Ace. There might be someone from DAW or Del Rey. The Orbit people have been coming to those as well. I don't know the Saga people. I met the Voyager, or the Harper people at Kevin J. Anderson's Superstars writing, and that's a conference rather than a con. But, if you go to Worldcon or World Fantasy, you can sometimes find them just at parties. You have to be very outgoing to do that. But one of the cool things they do is at most Worldcons, they have a What's New from Tor, where each of the editors that are there get up and pitch to the crowd the new books that they bought. Plus, you can also usually find a panel or two with agents and editors on them talking about being agents and editors. And those are gold. When I found those at conventions, like I could fill my little black book of editor names with like, okay, this person said this at this thing, this person said this, oh, this is this person's editor. Like, I got so much information from those things, but they're still, you have to travel, like they're expensive. There are ways to do this without traveling. So again, kind of watching which books they publish, looking in the forewords of books to see which editors are editing which books, because usually the author will acknowledge them. Looking online at the agent and editor blogs. The agents stealth it a lot more at these things, at the cons. At the conferences, they're more upfront because you're doing pitch sessions with them.
Are most of the attendees of these things all aspiring authors?
So at Worldcon, I would say that it is, you got a mix. At Worldcon, you'll have a bunch of the pros. A lot of the pros go to Worldcon to just hang out with their friends, right? You will have a bunch of what we call semi-pros or aspiring pros, kind of on the gambit of there. And so that's like a third. And then there's also like this third group that is the people actually running the con who are just fandom. They love being fandom, and they're like people like my editor, Moshe, before he became an editor. They just love science fiction and fantasy. A lot of these people were fans of all of this before the internet existed, and so they threw the cons in order to get together with their friends who had similar interests. They're like giant Facebook pages from the 50s, and they're still going right now. And so there are a lot of aspiring pros. Don't make yourself annoying if you go and you talk to an editor there. Like, what you want to do is, I would suggest if this is the route you want to take, which is not the only route, I would get together a couple friends, go together, share a hotel room, find out the panels the editors are on, go watch them, get familiar with who they are, ask them after the panel if they have a few minutes to sit down and chat, ask them maybe what they're working on and stuff like that, or find your own things to talk to them about. But you know, in the past, I've mentioned how useful these things were in my career. So the editors, well, I'll go to Worldcon, like, 80 more of your students found me. I'm like, yeah, that's what they're doing. They're doing their job. That's what they're supposed to be doing. They're like, all right, yes, Sanderson, all your students. So, but it has worked before. This is how Brian McClellan got published, was by going and doing these things, and he found the people at Orbit and just was really good at doing what I just talked about. So. Not the only way by far. You can still submit just kind of blindly, but even if you submit blindly, what you want to be doing is submitting a manuscript that says, dear, instead of dear acquisitions editor, you want to be able to say, dear Moshe Fader, I know that you are the editor who discovered and publishes Brandon Sanderson. I love Brandon's works. I have, read your blog posts about these things. He doesn't blog, I was on Facebook though. I followed you on Facebook for a while. I really like how you talk about writing. I think we'd be a good match. Here's my manuscript submitted as Tor's manuscript submission guidelines go. That's what you want to be doing, even if you can't go to the cons, instead of just, dear acquisitions editor, please find my manuscript enclosed. By the way, Moshe is really slow. So I'll warn you about my editor. I love Moshe to death, but since I've been published with him for 15 years, I can count the number of authors he's picked up on one hand. And he still just only does this part-time. So Moshe's not a good bet. Most people at Tor are acquiring way more than Moshe is. But I love Moshe. Yeah.
So in a conference where you're doing pitch sessions, what are those like?
Pitch sessions. So to do a pitch session, I would take your book, figure out how to do a one-sentence pitch on it. Okay? You can find out examples of these things online and whatnot. You can't do everything. So my one-sentence pitch for Mistborn was, what if the hero who was supposed to save the world failed and the Dark Lord took over? Now a group of thieves are going to try and rob him silly, bribe his armies away, overthrow the empire, and make off with the money. It's a mashup of Ocean's 11 and epic fantasy. That's your one-sentence pitch. Does that cover everything? No, not at all. So you want to have that pitch, and then they'll probably say, so tell me more. And then you are ready with kind of the longer summary. Well, there's this thief, Kelsier, who was a gentleman rogue who robbed the rich for his own benefit. He got caught, thrown in a terrible prison, and in the prison discovered he has incredible magic powers. The trauma brought them out. He has now escaped, and he wants vengeance on the Dark Lord, the man who years ago, 1,000 years ago, took over the world and has been ruling with an iron fist. But Kelsier's way of getting revenge is to rob somebody. That's the only thing he knows how to do. So he's getting together his old crew. He's going to pull off the heist of the millennia by robbing the Dark Lord himself. Problem is, he finds out that all their faces are too well known. They're all being hunted. There are certain things they can't do. They need a new recruit. So they go and recruit Vin, who's a 16-year-old street thief who has been manifesting some of the same powers that Kelsier has now mastered. It's primarily his story and her story as she is taken under his wing, trained to use the magic, and trained to imitate a noblewoman so she can infiltrate noble society for them to help them pull off their heist. You go into the longer pitch, right? Kind of hit some of these things, but still not hitting plot points. Have those 2 pitches ready. Practice them in front of your roommates. Practice them in front of people. The 1 sentence, which is really usually like 2 sentences put together with semicolons. But the 1 sentence pitch, and then the longer, this is like 2 or 3 paragraphs. But you want it to go as fast as I just gave mine. And then you want to be able to launch into longer descriptions when the person's intrigued of, oh, that's cool, what's the magic? Oh, the magic's really cool, it's like this. They're like, oh, that's great. What happens at the end? Because they often will want to know that. You're like, oh, it has a great twist ending. They're thinking they're doing this, and then this thing happens. And you just want to be able to talk animatedly about your story like that. If you do what I just did, every one of them is going to ask for your sample chapters. And then your sample chapters have to be awesome. But if your sample chapters are awesome, theoretically they'll request the full manuscript. And what you've got to remember is any of these places that I say take only unagented, or take agented submissions, which is, a lot of these guys, if you meet them at a convention, they have the right, they can be like, oh yeah, send that to me. That means you don't have to worry about that whole agented thing, right? You can submit to them directly. I would still, if they then call you and say, I'm really interested in this, I think we want to make an offer, who's your agent? That's when you say, let me get back to you tomorrow. And then you get an agent. And there are very few agents in the business who won't take you if you have someone on this board who has made an offer. I should mention there are publishers who are not on this board that are still totally legit. These are kind of the presses right below Bane in size. Tachyon, who did The Emperor's Soul for me, is a very good one that I recommend. Pyre has had some troubles back and forth, but Pyre's another one to look at. Those guys you can research, and those are worth being at. The problem is if you go to the rung underneath them, then you might as well just be self-publishing, generally, is my experience. Right here.
How do you get an agent overnight?
How do you get an agent overnight? Well, theoretically, if you've been doing what I'm saying, you've been submitting to different agents. You at least have a little book of some of the agents who represent the fiction that is like yours that you like. And if you send them emails and say, Dear Sharon November, I just got an offer from Ace for my epic fantasy book. They want 3 of them. Would you be interested in taking a look at it to represent me? That's free money, right? Now, not every agent will take that. They'll want to see the manuscript, because if the agent completely hates the manuscript, then they'll probably still pass or something like that. But every one of them will say yes. And if you have a list of like 10 that you can submit to and say, I've submitted this to multiple agents, if you could get back to me in the next couple of days, that would be awesome. I need to make a decision pretty soon so we can move forward with this. They'll all look at it really fast because, again, it's free money. And someone else has done the work that they normally do, and they like that idea, okay? So if you have an offer, you will not have trouble getting an agent. If you have an agent, you can still have trouble getting an offer, but it does happen a lot more likely that you will if you get one. Okay? Yes?
So sort of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I sort of, for myself, feel like I'm at like the Dark Knight of Despair moment that you got here. So I'm not to 12 yet, but I got 3 or 4.
Good.
So how do you know if what you're submitting is just complete crap? Or, like, it's obviously you are just going to keep going.
Yep. Yeah, how do you know if it's complete crap? Oh, boy. So there's a little piece inside of every artist that is whispering at all times, they're going to eventually figure out that you're all just crap, right? That you are not as good as all that. And so it never goes away. Understand that that's just part of being an artist. No matter how confident you are, there's a part of you that's like, yeah, but they're going to discover that I'm a hack. So understand that's there, and you just have to deal with that. How do you know my confidence was boosted a great deal by having a ring of friends who were reading my fiction and giving me feedback on it. What I always did is I finished a book, I printed off a copy, I wrote on the cover page, here's the type of feedback I'm looking for. If you could write this in the margins while you read, and pick a pen color and write your name on this cover page in that pen color. Then I would give it to someone else, and I would have 12 people read it and respond to each other's comments and give me all that that feedback. I would see what I'm doing good, doing well. And I would say, okay, this is working, this is not working, people are really confused here. I am creating the piece of fiction that I want to create. I don't know if it's professional caliber, but that's okay. I mean, at the point where you are probably creating stuff that is worth reading. It may not be professional caliber, but you don't write 4 books. Like, the worst writers I've known, and I've known some pretty bad ones, buy about 3 or 4 books. They're good enough, right? They're good enough that you can enjoy reading the book. They may not be good enough to go to the big leagues, but they're good enough, and you might be ready to go to the big leagues. So you just have to keep going with this, and you have to submit it to your friends, know that you love it. You're never going to know for sure until somebody buys it, because you're never going to be able to say, well, it's just my, it's my friends. You're always going to be able to say that, of course, they're going to like it. Submitting to things like Writers of the Future, if you have some shorts, is a good way to kind of get some validation. But once you start picking up, one of the big things that will happen as you are transitioning from aspiring to what we call semi-pro, someone who's really close to getting published, is you will start getting more personalized rejections. This is a really good thing. Like when you get a rejection that is not just, dear fill in the blank, and they've obviously filled in the blank in their mail merge or whatever. Unfortunately, this story just isn't for us. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Best of luck with publishing. When instead you get, we're not publishing a ton of epic fantasy right now. Our line is pretty full. We really liked your magic system. Your characters didn't grab us. It just didn't feel like you get even if it's just 1 page, something like that, where you're like, oh, they actually read this. That means you have hit semi-pro, right? You are there at semi-pro if you start getting any of those. They're taking the time. What that means is the editor's saying, this person I would like to submit to me again, and maybe I can see if their next book is good. I'll give them some personal attention. And or, every editor in the business who goes into this wants to be Hugo. What was his? Hugo Gernsback, who was like the early science fiction editor who nurtured a bunch of writers. Campbell was like this too. Not Joseph Campbell, the other Campbell, the award named after Campbell. And they would nurture writers and be like, hey, you're doing a good job, but you're really crap at endings. Got to fix your endings. Try this. Every editor, that's why they become editors. They want to help people become better writers. And so if they take the time, that means they think you have potential. Like one of the early ones I got was like someone scrawled, they gave me the form one, but they wrote across it, show, don't tell, in handwriting. That was like the first personal one that I got. And I'm like, oh, that's like way steps below true personalized, but at least they took the moment to say, hey, here's what you're specifically doing wrong. Start trying, hopefully you'll start getting those. Hopefully you've already gotten some. If you haven't, hopefully you'll start getting them.
So when you've got people reading or proofreading your book, your manuscript, you've got 12, 15 friends, family, whatever. Let's say you've got 12, you've got 6 people that say this part's confusing and 6 people that say they totally get it. What do you do?
What do you feel? You read that piece yourself and you are the ultimate decision maker. You have to do it feels like. Sometimes you want something to be confusing. Usually not, but once in a while you're like, I want this to be confusing. If you want it to be confusing, the easiest thing to do is have one of the characters say, wow, this is confusing. And then that gives the reader permission to be confused. And they're like, oh, okay. Sometimes you're like, I feel like half of my audience getting confused is too many for this piece. It's a really important plot element. I'd better make this extra clear. Sometimes you're like, this is kind of irrelevant. I'll actually kind of shove it more under the rug so it doesn't draw their attention and make them think that this is a major plot point. You go all different directions on those things. The more you do this, the more experience you'll get. And if you really want to get some better feedback, you can rewatch the lecture on writing groups and try to take some of those suggestions, try to explain your feelings rather than trying to fix the problem. Just write out, your feelings here, or things like that. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
How much time do you spend reading other books versus writing your own?
How much time? Not as much as I would like to, but I think it's pretty important. I try to spend like an hour a day. I don't always get it. Right here.
So, are the LTUE publishers too small?
LTUE publishers. Oh, I should mention the local publishers.
Like the smaller publishers.
I would rank them around the Bane level or just under, so they're legit. Particularly Shadow Mountain. Shadow Mountain is, I would say, equivalent to Bane in size. They could even be a little bit bigger than Bane, So yeah, Shadow Mountain's totally legit. All the people who are not Shadow Mountain, they are trying hard. I would look very closely at the contracts and what they're able to do for you that you couldn't do yourself. But I mean, I know some people like Cedar Fort's a good example. Cedar Fort's a publisher who's trying very hard, and I know they have some big names. I, am not equipped to talk about what Cedar Fort is able to do for you. I go talk to their authors. I know some people have had good experiences there, but they're kind of like that level below Bane, where it's legit. At the same time, you kind of have to ask yourself, how legit? Like, what can they do for me? Talk to their authors. I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying they are. I will say that Shadow Mountain is. And for those watching online, there'll probably be some local presses like yourself that'll kind of be on this line as well. And you just have to make that call. One of the things, there's also a distinction sometimes between what we call a small press and a regional press. Shadow Mountain is a regional press in that it mostly distributes in LDS bookstores, even the non-LDS books that they do. They get nationwide by having a partnership with Harper, I think it is. It's Simon, yeah. They have a partnership with one of the other things, and then the Simon & Schuster or whoever it is does their national distribution, and they do their local distribution, is kind of the way that it goes. So they're what we call a regional press. Mm-hmm.
So through their partnership, if you get a deal with them, are your books still going out to national books?
Yes, if you get a deal with Shadow Mountain, I believe every book of theirs is available in Barnes & Nobles on the bookshelves. But Bane has the same thing, Empire has the same thing. They'll get them in there generally too. And so, they're not one of the big five, but they can get your books in there. They do it primarily by having a good partnership with a big five. But yeah. No, Shadow Mountain's totally legit. They launched Brandon Mull. They launched James Dashner. Well, Cedar Fort launched James Dashner. They had his first books. Then he moved to Shadow Mountain after that. But they also, J. Scott Savage, Lisa Mangum. They've done a lot of great writers. And again, they mostly distribute locally, but they do get them in the Barnes & Nobles. So you have the chance to go big with that.
If you were a college student again, what is one class you take or one area of study you pursue in order to become a better?
Okay, so what I would do is I would pick something I'm very passionate about that I think aligns with for me, it would be things like Asian history, right? Having served my mission in Korea and things like that, I'd take more Asian history classes and things like that, like more history, little less English, probably. That's what I would do. Pick something you're passionate about, though, and then let that inform like what your characters are passionate about. Do the John Grisham thing. He was a lawyer. He loved lawyer stuff. He wrote lawyer thrillers. You could take pretty much anything that you're passionate about, study it, and make some characters passionate about it in a book, and it'll be a great book. A better book than if it hadn't had that element in it. Speaking, though, of what I would do if I were in your shoes. Because we talked a lot about today and last week about publishing with traditional New York publishing. Let's take a step to the side and reiterate self-publishing as a viable option. So what tends to work in self-publishing, and this is changing, but you do see shorter books, faster-paced books, released in series quickly, being the things that really take off self-published. The other things that take off self-published are things that are not being produced by the big five, that there is a hole in the market for, that someone's able to jump on. The biggest author in the world, arguably right now, I may have mentioned this, I can't remember, is Bella Forrest. Somebody that you're like, who? Well, Bella Forrest publishes a book or two every month of vampire romance novels on Kindle. And these books are often number one or number two in the category. I think she's like the number 2 or number 1 author on Amazon. Basically, everybody wanted more Twilight, but they wanted kind of faster paced, shorter, that they could read one every month. They basically wanted Hardy Boys Twilight, right? And no one was doing that. And so this person jumped on it. And we're not even sure if it's one person or many, but whoever it is, or whoever they are, they're kind of just really hit a hole in the market and are knocking it out of the park sales-wise. That does not mean you need to write that. What I'm saying is if what you happen to write is something that works kind of in the 50 to 70,000 word range, episodic, fast-paced, that's a natural fit for self-publishing. A lot of urban fantasy does very well self-publishing. Even some of the fantasy, some of the ones that really took off are a little bit more Bob Salvatore, Drizzt, that sort of stuff. That style of fast-paced, action-oriented fantasy has taken off a little bit better than big epic fantasies. That's not to say that big epic fantasies can't. And there are some people who are writing them. I would say the big one is, what's his name? He's a really cool guy. I've only met him once, but he's really nice. The Youre Chronicles. He's always on Reddit. But what's that?
Hugh Howey?
No, Hugh Howey is science fiction, but Hugh Howey is like the king of self-published science fiction and fantasy, unless you count Bella Forest. But Hugh Howey, and what Hugh Howey did was he did, it's the Youre Revelations, Isaac, his name is series. He did novella-length sections that worked very well on their own, released them each for like $1 or $2, and then released the collection at the end. Michael J. Sullivan. He's doing epic fantasy and really doing a good job of it, self-published. So it's totally viable. But yeah, Hugh Howey's another one to watch. He kicked off this whole serialized larger book that you pay a couple bucks for each installment, and then there's 6 installments and then a final book. And I mean, Hugh Howey, I have no idea how many copies he sold, but it's got to be in the millions. If I were you right now, and I would base what I did on a couple of factors. First, how fast do I write? Am I writing a couple of books a year? Because I was, but you don't have to be me. If you're writing one book every 3 or 4 years, self-publishing is probably a bad match for you. Okay? Traditional publishing is going to be a better haven for you. If you are writing fast, I would say, what is your where your interests? Are they varied? Can you do these fast-paced books? What type of thing you're writing? Middle grade, not really taking off on ebooks. The kids are not capable of buying them for themselves. That's the big distinction between middle grade and YA. Middle grade, they don't buy the books themselves. Someone gives them to them. YA buy the books themselves. So YA, yes, Bella Forest is YA. The #1 author on Amazon are YA books. You can totally take off in YA but middle grade, not so much, because the kid in 3rd grade or 4th grade is not going to have access to a credit card. At least they shouldn't. So the parents have to buy the books for them. The parents still kind of want to go to bookstores or things like that. That will probably shift. So looking at me writing 2 books a year, I would try to write one fast-paced, sort of a little more pulpish, and I don't use that derogatorily term. Pulp means fast plot, kind of thriller pacing, and a very discernible genre, right? Like it's your mysteries, your thrillers, your like the Wax and Wayne books are pulp books. I would write one of those and self-publish it, and then I would write an epic fantasy and send it to New York. Then I'd write another one of the short ones and publish it. And then work on another epic fantasy to send to New York. And whichever started taking off, I would do that. And if the book goes to New York to all these places and comes back rejected, I would self-publish it and put it in the line of self-publishing. And I would be trying both methods. But I know myself, I write fast, I can write the stuff that does well self-publishing, and I don't mind doing it myself. Because that's the third thing. If you're like, I have no desire to find my own cover art and things like this, I really, really, really like the idea of someone else taking care of all that so I can focus only on the writing, then self-publishing is not for you. If whatever you write, regardless of whether it's what I've said it matches or not, if you're like, I love the idea of only being accountable for myself, of making sure the cover is something I like, of making sure the editing is something I like, self-publishing is a fantastic match for you. The small process can be a little bit better at working with you on things like that as well. Okay? Yes?
you talk about writing stuff you're passionate about?
Yep.
Especially with like your Rule Zero.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what your big passionate starting idea was for the Stormlight Archive.
Stormlight Archive?
And how did that kind of go?
So the big start of the Stormlight, the earliest idea was the character of Dalinar, who was the brother to the king after the king gets assassinated, whose nephew, who should be king, is a bad king. And so what do you do if you're put in that position where you love your brother and your nephew? It's this whole leadership concept, which is fascinating to me, right? What do you do if you're put in that position? Do you usurp the throne for the good of the kingdom, or do you let a bad king rule and do your best to keep him from screwing things up too much? That was the earliest idea for the Stormlight Archive. The other big passion thing for me was my belief that epic fantasy was not going as far as it needed to go or could go in world building. I felt that the addition of magic and not having to follow the laws of physics in consistent ways, but that sort of thing, could lead to really fantastical, interesting settings that nobody was writing. There was too much medieval Europe or medieval Japan. And I don't mind those books. I enjoy the kind of faux medieval whatever. But nobody was doing bizarre world with different ecologies and things like that. And I'm like, someone should be doing this. I should mention that after I made my decision, like I had that epiphany of I'm going to do this, I sat down and said, I'm going to write the biggest, baddest book ever, right? They're rejecting me. They say my books are too long. I'm going to write one longer. Right? I'm going to write the book that I want to write that no one's ever going to want to publish, and that was The Way of Kings. That was book number 13. That was the book where I'm like, no one wants this. I will make this book that is only for me and is like the most ambitious thing. And then after I finished it, I got the call, the Elantris sold. Funny story, I then sent Way of Kings, because my edit, Moshe, he's like, I love Elantris. What are you working on now? I'm like, well, it's a 400,000 word epic fantasy. He's like, whoa. You're ambitious. And he repeated that phrase and has many times through my career. He's like, well, I'll look at it. And I sent it to him. And he called back terrified. He's like, can we cut this? I'm like, well, it doesn't really feel like it has a good cutting point. He's like, yeah, I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around this and things. He was really scared because the thing you got to understand why he was so scared is that the larger the book gets, the less the publisher makes off of it. Because like a book that, let's say it's 400,000 words, they might charge $2 more than the book that's 200,000 words, but the printing cost is double, the editorial cost is double, everything is double, but people don't pay proratedly in their mind for entertainment. A movie that's 3 hours long costs us in our heads the same as one that's 90 minutes long. That's just how we do it. And same thing with books. You can inch it up a little bit more, but not much. And so it's a huge, huge thing for a publisher to try to publish a super big book by a new author. So, but I told him I didn't want to do Way of Kings yet. And he was so relieved. So I'm like, I'm working on Mistborn actually right now. Way of Kings has some problems I want to fix before we publish it. So he was very happy to hear I was doing because then I pitched Mistborn to him, like the pitch that I just gave you guys. He's like, whoa! They were really excited about that. All right, last question.
So lots of
What's that? Oh, who you already had one. So did I? No? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so lots of us in this class have been very lucky to get great writing groups. If someone's watching at home and they don't know a lot of writers to be in a group with, what should they do?
Right, okay, we'll end on this question. Again, if you have ones I didn't answer, I will be here at the final, just sitting around answering questions and chatting. If you can't get a writing group, your local science fiction convention, the people who take the panels about how to write, who do the workshops, are going to be one of your best places. If you're not in college, college is a great place, but these are the things the cons are great at. It can take some work to find people who will fit, but it can work. And I should mention to all of you, if you have a writing group that needs extra members, because some of the people were auditing and dropped out or just not interested, or if you are somebody who really wants to be in a writing group, but it didn't work out or things like that, why don't you guys, can they email you, Isaac, and we can kind of keep a list so that we can kind of connect people together who might be interested in keeping writing groups going following the class. All right, guys, this has been your class. You have been a great audience. You are now done. Go forth and write and create great fiction, and remember me in your acknowledgements pages.